Shut up and sit down.
Welcome into the Hall of Fame Dynasty podcast. It is episode 6, everyone. I did miss the last 2 podcast episodes. It's been a lot helping a family member through a tough time and then also just working lots of hours with work. I've barely been making it to 8 o'clock Central really awake or alert at all. And I've felt old recently, I'll say that much. But I'm here once again, episode 6 of the Dynasty podcast for you guys. And while our fantasy baseball season ended in spectacular fashion, the Washington Nationals obviously won, as we discussed, but we are now into the award ceremony as that part of the year is going on. If you haven't heard, Yordan Alvarez and Pete Alonso are your rookies of the year for the AL and NL respectively. Not too much of a surprise there, as the rookie crop was great, but did not live up to expectation. Fernando Tatis got hurt too often. He wasn't able to hold up for a full season. And then on the other side, you have Baby Vlad and Eloy, who did not live up to their expectations, even though they stayed pretty healthy throughout the year, which was pretty unfortunate. But these guys, Alonso and Alvarez, just came up and absolutely dominated for the time that they were up there, with Pete Alonso hitting over 50 home runs and Yordan Alvarez with over 25 in his short stint, I believe, from the middle of July and on. Obviously, he struggled in the playoffs and didn't help the Astros when they really needed it in the end. But the Astros can claim that they have not only the Rookie of the Year, but they can also say they have the Cy Young candidate in Justin Verlander, and then you have Jacob deGrom coming in with the Cy Young for the NL side, which to me is not too much of a surprise. As great as Max Scherzer and Steven Strasburg and Hyunjin Ryu and Walker Buehler were, Jacob deGrom did it all on a bad Mets team, and once again, this is why records should not matter, because there are so many other things that matter, such as ERA, strikeouts, walks allowed, things like that. So we'll get the rest of the awards later tonight, obviously after I'm done recording. We still have MVP, Comeback Player of the Year, which I think Lucas Giolito of the White Sox should get after being the worst pitcher in all of baseball in 2018. Put up an absolutely spectacular year, all-star worthy season. So I think he'll take that. But let's get on to the Astros news that came across recently, with the Astros caught stealing signs in 2017, and 4 players actually owned up to it, with the biggest one being Mike Fiers at this point. He was the only one that's come out publicly and said it. And there's been a lot of videos, and if you haven't seen it, go check out John Boy's Twitter account. It's JOM as M as in man, and then BOY. He does a great breakdown of it, and you can hear a banging sound whenever it's an off-speed pitch, whether it's a slider, it's 2 bangs, changeup is 1, and it's been shown in a lot of different games. The main one that started this whole thing was one against the Chicago White Sox, and it's only on off-speed pitches, so it's how they were doing it, we don't know yet, but we'll have to wait and see. Whether the MLB does anything about it is going to be the biggest thing, because they cracked down on the Red Sox in, I believe, 2016 when they were caught using Apple Watches in the dugout and relaying signs that way. But this is definitely a big problem because of the fact that they already have players stealing signs from second, which to me is not a big deal because that's just a part of the game. That's gone on for years, but when you're using somebody in center field and relaying it to the dugout, who then is using a bat to bang on the bat rack to then pass it on to the batter, it's a quick relay and it seems really fast, but the fact that it takes away from the game at that point, at least in my mind. And there's a lot of people who argue, oh, it's just a part of it, or it's fine and let it play on. And we kind of had the same argument with steroids back in the day of some people want to see just everyone do steroids and see everyone hit dingers. But to each their own, and I think it takes away from the game in my opinion. But it it's been a hell of a 2 months for the Astros in terms of PR because of the fact you have this, you have obviously Roberto Ozuna with his domestic violence issues, and then you have Brandon Tauchman with his whole thing of supporting Roberto Ozuna and yelling at the women in the clubhouse after their ALCS win. It's been a rough go for them the last couple of months, and it'll be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. And if you actually haven't seen it, check out the 2017 home and road splits for the Astros. It's pretty jarring just how big of a difference they had between their home and road splits. They were great at home, mediocre on the road for a lot of players, which obviously players always play better at home, but just how drastic they are is pretty crazy, really. So I'll be interested to see what happens with the Astros, whether this continues on, whether it gets found out for 2019, if they did it then as well, but 2017 really seems to stand out for everyone. But that's enough for baseball for tonight. There's not a whole lot to talk about. I just think that Astros is a big thing, and we'll have to keep an eye over the offseason to see what happens. Obviously, not a lot of news on the free agency front with Steven Strasburg, Anthony Rendon, Garrett Cole, the three biggest names out there. There's been a lot of trade rumors for Mookie Betts, Chris Bryant, and Francisco Lindor. Nothing's come of that yet, but we do have the winter meetings still going on, even though it truly doesn't feel like winter just yet. They are going on at this point. So why don't we move on to the gridiron? Week 10 was filled with a lot of storylines. I mean, we didn't have many close games, but due to the matchups, there were a lot of shuffles in the playoffs at this point. So let's start off with the biggest blowout from Week 10, which is the Dallas Cowboys at the Las Vegas Raiders. I was really surprised to see this be as much of a blowout as it was, because the Raiders have been a decent team, not a great team, but decent this whole year, and they got blown out by almost 100 points, with the Dallas Cowboys just absolutely dominating. What hurt the Raiders most was them missing George Kittle, Dion Lewis, and David Johnson, giving them goose eggs, all three of them with zeros on the board. Obviously, Kittle was a toss-up whether he was going to play on Monday Night Football, but then Dion Lewis and David Johnson giving zeros really hurt them. And David Johnson has looked absolutely terrible recently. If you haven't seen it, go check out Twitter. He looks real slow. He looks unwilling to commit to the run, to pounding it between the tackles. It reminds me of Eddie Lacy in his last couple of years, where he just looks slow. Which is pretty crazy considering, I mean, a year and a half ago we considered David Johnson one of the best running backs in the league. So that hurt the Raiders. Whether that's going to be something to watch out for going forward, whether the Raiders are going to move on from him, we'll have to see. But what really helped Dallas was Christian Kirk, Dalvin Cook, and Lamar Jackson each blowing up for at least 30 points each, them totaling almost 100 points on the week. Obviously, it's going to be a tough team to beat, whether it's the Dallas Cowboys or whether it was the New England Patriots in our league. It's going to be tough when three players combined for almost a half of your points on the week. And it was a rough go for the Raiders. Hopefully they can bounce back. Because they are still in the hunt for a wild card spot at this point in our league. Which, before I move on to the next matchup, let's talk about the playoffs. At this point, it would be the Dallas Cowboys as the number 1 seed, leading the pack at 8-2, with my Kansas City Chiefs at 7-3, holding that second bye week spot. Then we would have the Buffalo Bills at 6-4. You've got the Broncos at 6-4, along with the Raiders, and it's between the New Orleans Saints and Atlanta Falcons at 5-5. If I were to do a deep dive into it real quick, I believe the Saints hold the tiebreaker over the Atlanta Falcons. Yep, quick looking at standings. Saints would be 6, Falcons would be 7, just on the bubble there. With the Broncos holding 3, Raiders holding 4, and Bills holding 5, based on head-to-head matchups. So we've definitely got a hell of a race in the playoff race this year. It's going to be interesting compared to last year, where we had a lot of teams that were under 500 because of the domination from the Broncos and my then Bears at that time. So we'll have to see what ends up happening for the rest of the year. But obviously Dallas has a strong hold on that number 1 spot, and let's see if they can hold it going to end the year. Now the next matchup that we'll dive into here is the Miami Dolphins at Buffalo Bills. Not too much of a surprise here with the way that the Bills really bought into making a playoff push with Austin Hooper and a couple other moves that they made. They won this week pretty dominantly by a score of 198 to 101. And really what hurt the Dolphins was only starting 12 guys. 2 guys were missing due to injury, with that being LaShawn McCoy and... who was the other player that they were missing that game? It would be... oh, come on. Give me all players playing. Who was missing? I do not know. Let me see. I know LaShawn McCoy was missing. He was a healthy scratch. He's seemed to have lost that starting job for the Kansas City Chiefs over this last couple of weeks because of the fact that he had injuries. And that's what it was. The Dolphins were missing a wide receiver with Nelson Aguilar on bye and Will Fuller, Deshaun Jackson both on bye and injured, and Sterling Shepard not being able to play as he is also injured. So pretty easy week for the Buffalo Bills as they make their comeback and playoff push. They're definitely right up there with everyone else, as I said. They are 6-4. They're holding on to that playoff spot as tight as they can. And they've got a rough schedule coming up with them having to face the Raiders. They've got to face the New Orleans Saints and Dallas Cowboys to finish out their season. So they've got, if they want to make the playoffs, they're going to have to make every single week count at this point. They're on the top part of the bubble, but they do not want to lose it as they've pushed all in this year. They want to try and go for that championship. So we'll have to see if they can win. Now, even though they won this week due to some big blow-up games, they also lost in a sense because Tyler Lockett was hospitalized after Monday night's game, and Austin Hooper is expected to miss at least a month with that knee injury that he sustained. So that's a big blow to the Bills, especially with what they gave up. They could have had a healthy Mike Williams, even though that Chargers offense has not been as great as we all expected, but we'll have to see if they can get healthy in the right time and if they're able to hold on to that playoff spot. So the Buffalo Bills are doing a good job of making that playoff push, but whether they'll be healthy enough or strong enough to do it, we'll have to wait and see. On to our third matchup of the week with the Denver Broncos going to Foxborough to take on the New England Patriots and Vic. Surprisingly, this was a fairly close matchup for most of the day. I was surprised that the Broncos kept them within reach as long as they did, especially with the New England Patriots only fielding 10 and having 2 goose eggs out of that 10 as well. Ty Montgomery and Mike Davis being those goose eggs at that point. The Patriots had some pretty decent performances out of the San Francisco defense for 27 and Mark Andrews with 23. He's really bounced back after a rough couple of weeks. We'll have to see if that continues. The deal that they made for Mark Andrews over this offseason looked like a great deal for them. And the Patriots really are on kind of ticking up as of the last few weeks with DJ Metcalf looking really good, Mark Andrews looking really good. They also had goose eggs from Cordarrelle Patterson and CJ Uzomah. The Patriots probably could have taken this had they just fielded a full team, or at least they could have made it a more respectable loss, as they lost by almost 70 points. So Vic's getting on the right path if he wants to win and make a playoff push. He'll be interesting to see next year, especially if he's able to keep active on the waiver wire like he has been with DJ Chark, who was a great pickup this year. So we'll have to see what the Patriots really are. I think they're getting to be a much improved team after what we saw last year, even though their record doesn't truly show it. So that's what it is. We expected the Broncos to win. They let the Patriots hang around much longer than I expected them to. And the Broncos have a rough bye week coming up as they take on the Kansas City Chiefs this next week. We'll have to see what they can do. So why don't we look at the Kansas City Chiefs since they were just mentioned. The Atlanta Falcons took on my Kansas City Chiefs. And Chris was talking a lot of shit going to this matchup that he was going to win, that it's not going to matter. And I'm going to clarify for both Chris and Mac, because Chris tried telling me earlier in the week that I was 0-3 as a Kansas City Chief. And Mac said last episode, that my Chiefs were 0-2, which I've only been the Chiefs for 2 weeks now. So my record is 1-1 as the Kansas City Chiefs. And the reason I switched to the Chiefs, I've got Kelsey, I've got Hill. I enjoy the color of the red. And I'm just so embarrassed with the Chicago Bears in real life. The fact that they've been absolutely stupid dumb on offense. The fact that it came out recently, like we talked about in the chat, that they didn't even do an outside interview of that, outside of that 15-minute cursory interview that they had with Deshaun Watson at the Combine, the guy who beat Alabama in the national championship before the upcoming year's draft. The guy was an absolute star-studded talent, and everyone knew he was going to be good, at least a floor guy in the NFL. So how do you not try and take time out for one of the best players in college football of the last 2 years? You said you needed a quarterback. You said you needed to find the right guy, and you were willing to do all that it took, and you didn't even spend a little bit of time with Deshaun Watson because you must have been so over the moon with Mitchell Trubisky, which I don't understand how you were. That just blows my mind. So I'm glad I divorced myself from the Chicago Bears. They've been an absolute embarrassment, and they are just absolutely frustrating to pay attention to. So let's get back to the matchup. Little tangent aside there. But the Kansas City Chiefs had big blow-up games from Daniel Jones and Tyreek Hill, who both scored over 30 points. And Derrick Henry led the Falcons with 33, and that was really their biggest game, or biggest performer of the week was Derrick Henry, who surprisingly had 33 points in a very tough matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. Although that Titans offense has been much, much better ever since Ryan Tannehill took over. So what's in the cards for Marcus Mariota's future? No one really knows. And we'll have to see what happens there, because that's an interesting situation considering Tannehill was let go from Miami, considering that Marcus Mariota was supposed to be this franchise-changing quarterback for them. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But the Falcons really struggled at wideouts. Juju Smith-Schuster struggled, and their only double-digit game came from Demaryius Thomas, which we all know that the New York Jets offense has been pretty miserable this year, and if Demaryius Thomas is your best wide receiver on a week, you're not going to have a high chance to win. Unfortunately, they did lose Emmanuel Sanders to injury, obviously, on Monday Night Football. He only put up 4.4 points, and the Chiefs running backs did struggle a lot. Montgomery, Elliott, Barkley all had under 10 points, which was pretty crazy. Obviously, Elliott had a pretty bad matchup going against the Minnesota Vikings, so we'll have to see what happens there. Barkley getting 1 yard on 13 carries was terrible, but made up for it with his receptions in the passing game. And he's banged up. We'll have to see what happens there with his health. But he has a very juicy playoff schedule, so that's going to be something to monitor, obviously, in the future. And keep in mind that the Kansas City Chiefs did dominate the Falcons while Cooper Kupp had 0 points. So thank you for putting that in the show doc. Chris, I applaud you for that. I mean, you could have been absolutely just stomped way worse than you already were with 30 points had Cooper Kupp done absolutely anything. Now, this was a surprise for the closest matchup of the week with the Green Bay Packers from Josh and Kevin's New Orleans Saints, as they were surprisingly actually a pretty fun game to watch, with the New Orleans Saints taking down the Packers at home 156-134. Surprisingly, the top performers for New Orleans were Kyler Kyler Murray and Jarvis Landry with 26 and 24 points respectively. Kyler Murray's looked really good as of late, and luckily the Saints were able to get him in there. And where the Packers really seemed to struggle was at wideout. They did not have the best game, especially when your leading scorers at wide receiver are Larry Fitzgerald and Jamison Crowder. Jamison Crowder has been a good floor guy this year. He's been surprisingly competent with the Jets. He's been a good Jarvis Landry light type of guy when he was with Miami. But the Packers really need to look at their wideout options for 2020. That's their biggest need for improvement. I know Chris believes they need a big improvement at quarterback, but Kirk Cousins has been more than competent, has been actually pretty stable ever since that beating that he suffered at the hands of the Chicago Bears. He's put up 27, 29, 11, 21, and 19. I feel like that Vikings offense is starting to come into its own. It's starting to figure it out, especially with Dalvin Cook. You can't sell out all for the run because then guys like Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen are going to beat you in the passing game. So I don't think quarterback's a huge need for the Packers in this league, but it never hurts to try and improve. So we'll see what happens there. And this New Orleans Saints team has been respectable, to say the least. They're still chasing that playoff spot for this year. What's hurt them is Austin Eckler is not getting the same amount of work as he did earlier in the year, but he's still putting up respectable points with double digits each of the last 4 weeks. So they've at least got that to count on, but guys like Zach Pascal, Eric Ebron, TJ Hawkinson are more guys that are boom or bust each week, and especially Peyton Barber has not been living up to what he thought he was going to be, especially with Ronald Jones getting all of the work recently. Now, when it comes to the future of the New Orleans Saints, they've got a great core with Kyler Murray, Marlon Mack, Michael Gallup, Jarvis Landry. I like what they've got going on for the future, and they'll be interesting to watch. They'll just have to use, or at least try and use, that one pick they have of Miami's in the second round to try and improve there. They've got a good pickup in Darren Fells at tight end. He's going to be useful the next few years, at least from what he's looked like this year. He's a boomer bust guy, but the tight end landscape seems to absolutely blow. So, once again, we've got the New Orleans Saints on the outside looking in, or on the inside looking out, at least for the playoffs. Let's take a quick look at their schedule for the next few weeks of the regular season. Unfortunately, they do draw the Dallas Cowboys this week, which is a very tough matchup for them. But they do close out the next 2 weeks with the Buffalo Bills and the Atlanta Falcons. One of those games is absolutely winnable for the New Orleans Saints, the Falcons game. They should win that one. But the Bills and the Cowboys are a very tough way to end this year. Whether they can do it or not, we'll have to wait and see. But I don't think the Falcons, Dolphins, Patriots, or Packers are really going to make much of a push for the playoffs. So I like the Saints making the playoffs, considering who they have behind them. So we'll have to wait and see. But I think it's going to be a very interesting week coming up. Looks like a lot of blowouts, with surprisingly the Dolphins and the Falcons being the closest game this upcoming week. But the real games that matter are the Buffalo Bills taking on the Raiders and the Broncos taking on the Kansas City Chiefs. Those are going to be the two most important ones when it comes to seeding, because the Raiders are looking to try and win the Tom Landry division, as they lost a game this last week after losing to the Cowboys, and with the Chiefs taking on dominating the Falcons. So enough for the gridiron. Let's move over to the ice and take a look what happened this last week. Surprisingly, your previous reigning champions and still champions Chicago Blackhawks dominated the Dallas Stars, beat them by over 150 points this last week. If I remember the score right. Yeah, 403 to 254, almost a 150-point difference. And the Blackhawks are the first team to hit 400 points since week 1. Obviously, with week 1 being that extended week that went almost 2 weeks. So not too much of a surprise that it's been a while since somebody's hit 400 points. But the Dallas Stars were the were in the top half of scoring this last week, so they kind of drew a bad matchup. The only teams they really would have beat were the Toronto Maple Leafs and the New York Rangers. So they're right in competition with everyone else. They don't have a bad team, but they just kind of drew a bad luck schedule for last week, taking on the Chicago Blackhawks. Austin Matthews with a hell of a week for the Chicago Blackhawks with 49.5 points. Absolutely dominant. And then Patrick Kane has absolutely bounced back from his slow start with 41 points in this matchup. Really, really well performing for those two guys. Obviously old and young all at the same time. For the Dallas Stars, they had some good performances. Travis Konechny for the right winger for the Philadelphia Flyers looked really good with 28 points on the week. But everyone else just kind of you had some solid weeks, some double-digit performances. But when guys like Victor Arvidsson and James Van Riemsdyk, Mark Stone are only putting up 4.4 points each, you're going to have a hard time. It's not going to be fun. You're never going to have a dominant week. So tough break for the Dallas Stars, but I like what they've been doing. They were 19 starts behind the Chicago Blackhawks. I do not know if they just missed starts or if the schedule just didn't work out for them, but tough loss for the Dallas Stars, who now drop to a 2-3 record, which is surprisingly still better than the Minnesota Wild. So why don't we get into the Minnesota Wild? Because they've had a weird year once again. They're supposed to be this really good team. Mac supposedly knows everything about hockey, but he started off 1-4 after losing to the Anaheim Mighty Ducks. Absolutely dominated by almost 140 points, 382 to 246. And the Anaheim Mighty Ducks have looked really good as of late. Obviously, Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl are going to be great performers. Not too much of a surprise there. Each of them putting up 30 points. Thomas Hertl has looked really good this last week for the San Jose Sharks, putting up 31. And the Ducks have been a very good team. They have the number one scoring offense as of this point by almost 100 points over the Chicago Blackhawks. And so the Minnesota Wild, though, just seem to really struggle. When Casey Middlestad only put up .3, he's supposed to be one of the top scorers. Phil Kessel with only 8.3 on the week, although it looks like I believe he only had him. Yeah, he had him for a couple of starts, so definitely not the performances that you're wanting. And then Miro Heiskanen has not lived up to too much of his potential, I guess. He's been looking better than he did last year, obviously performing better for fantasy. But there was a lot of struggles for the Minnesota Wild this last week. Hopefully they can get back to their winning ways, but the Ducks are an absolutely very good team, and they're looking for their first championship in hockey. Whether they get it or not, we'll have to wait and see. But they are one step closer to that bye week for the bye week later in the year. Getting a little ahead of myself when it comes to playoffs. So let's move on to our next matchup of last week, which is the Vegas Golden Knights taking on the Colorado Avalanche in Colorado. And just like in football, Chris got absolutely stomped by about an 80-point difference. And the Colorado Avalanche had 62, both teams had 62 starts, but an 80-point difference. And a lot of it came from guys like Alexander Barkov, Nathan McKinnon, mostly from the center position for the Colorado Avalanche. Artemi Panarin has looked really, really good for the New York Rangers this year as a left winger. He's definitely seems like he's improved a lot. He already has 19 points on the year, where he had 87 points last year in 79 games. So about the same performance point-wise in terms of goals and assists. So we'll have to wait and see how he does for the rest of the year. But the Golden Knights just played like crap. Rasmus Dahlin only had 2.4. Brendan Montour had 2.3. Jordan Binnington had a good start in his one start with 7.4 points. But the Golden Knights just really struggled all around with Jamie Benn, Logan Couture in single digits and not even breaking 5 points. Jeff Skinner with 1.8. The Golden Knights just looked like crap, played like crap, and they now drop to second in the Chris Chelios division, dropping to 3-2. That is 2 losing weeks for them in a row. Whether they can bounce back this next week against the LA Kings, we'll have to wait and see. It's a close matchup so far, and the Golden Knights think they can be a top team. We'll have to wait and see if that rings true. Now, for our fourth matchup in the NHL, you have the Toronto Maple Leafs taking on the New York Rangers. The Toilet Bowl is what this should have been called, because these are the two teams that did not break 200 points. I mean, neither of them, I don't think, set their lineup. The Maple Leafs had 47 starts, the Rangers with 34. Steve and Vic, I know you guys don't seem to care, but you guys have pretty good players. I mean, you look at Toronto Maple Leafs with Adam Fox, who had who has 25.8 points in this matchup this last week. Oscar Klefbom with 27.5. And son of a bitch, I dropped Adam Fox last year because of the fact that I didn't think he was going to play anywhere. But he's looked really good this last few weeks. I mean, you look at him on the year, and Adam Fox has been, over the last 30 days, he's averaged almost 4 points per game, but the past 14 days, over 5 points per game for fantasy. Absolutely stellar as a 21-year-old. And, I mean, it's what the Rangers kind of needed, but unfortunately it came against Vic's New York Rangers, who now sits at, I believe, no wins still on the year for Vic in hockey, which is a tough go. Yeah, the New York Rangers sit at 0-5. The Toronto Maple Leafs finally chalk up their first win, and a lot of it comes on the back of Adam Fox, guys that I've already mentioned. I think the Toronto Maple Leafs could be fun to watch if they just set their lineup. I mean, Jonathan Huberdeau with 18, Andreas Janssen with 16.4, William Nylander with 26.2, who's been really solid this year, to say the least. Not anything spectacular, but willing to be out there. And they do need some help at goalie for sure, with Georgiev for the Rangers with -1.2, and Jose Saros with only 5 points on the week, 5 goals allowed, but 50 saves made. So pretty impressive with the saves, but I mean, you can't allow that many goals if you're going to be taking that many shots. So Maple Leafs get on the board with their first win. So let's move on to our last one of the week, which was the Nashville Predators at the LA Kings. I was really surprised to see how this broke down, because you had the LA Kings coming off a win over the Colorado Avalanche in Week 4, and then they dropped this one by about 26 points to the Nashville Predators. They did have 12 less starts, so a little bit on the lucky side for the Nashville Preds when it comes, bad math on air. 28 points for the Nashville Predators. I don't remember why I said 12. But 12 start difference, 28 points overall. I mean, that's really nothing, not that big of a gap to overcome. Just over 2 points per game they would have needed. And especially with Ryan Getzlaf with 0.1. Patrick Hornfist with a 0 on the week. You had Sergei Bobrovsky with 0 on the week as well, along with Peter Mrazek for the Carolina Hurricanes. Really, those goose eggs killed the LA Kings. But the Nashville Preds are off to a pretty hot start after digging a hole last year. They were able to bounce back, but this year they've gotten off to a hot start. They are 4-1 and tied in the Ed Belfour division with the Anaheim Mighty Ducks and the Colorado Avalanche. They are 400 points behind on total offense from the Mighty Ducks. So a little bit of schedule luck for them here, but it all matters. It doesn't matter so much who you play, but when you play them, and they're doing well. They're taking down teams that they have to take down. You've got to win overall. But Kevin deserves a lot of credit. He's built a pretty good team, and it's showing so far. Obviously, he's had some good pickups. Holding on to Anthony Mantha was a great one for him. He's looked really good. JT Miller's been great for him all year. And he's been active on the waiver wire, and it's definitely paid off for him so far. So congratulations, Kevin. You are 4-1 and tied in a very, very tough division with both Jared and Keith. Lots of props to you there. You've done an excellent job. So the way this division is going to play out is going to be a ton of fun, and I'm interested to see what happens. So we have 4 4-1 teams, 1 3-2, and a couple of 2-3s. Mac, I'm surprised you're still sitting there at 1-4. We'll have to see how that plays out. A lot of it's just been, let's see where you're. I'm curious what has happened with the Minnesota Wild. They've had the second toughest schedule at this point with 1,842 points against them scored. So, but they've also had a top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Their 7th highest scoring offense. So it's not like it's completely puck luck going against them. Their biggest underperformers have been Kasperi Kapanen, Dylan Strome, Phil Kessel, all under 4 points per game. Shane Godesbeer has been under 3 points per game so far. They've had some real struggles. Casey Middlestad with under 3 points per game so far is really, really surprising, and that's really killing him at this point. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out, see what happens. And maybe the Wild can bounce back. Maybe they can't. Maybe they try and get younger once again like they did last year. But we've got a long way to go in the hockey season. So let's move over onto the hardwood, I should say, not hardwood, and look at the matchups from week 3 in the NBA season. We actually had some really, really good matchups, and let's start off. We had some good matchups. We had some blowouts when it comes to scoreboard-wise. So let's start off with the Atlanta Hawks at the Milwaukee Bucks. The Hawks win 7-2. Hawks dominated in most categories, but the ones that were closest really were free throw percentage and the field goal percentage, your ratio stats. They played very close with the Milwaukee Bucks, but everything else was fairly dominant. You look at three-pointers, they took by over 20, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks. The Bucks just have struggled. Part of it's health, part of it's just the fact that their previous owner did sell off a lot of the NBA stock, so they're stuck starting guys like Seko Doumbouya. You've got Darius Bazley, who's a rookie for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Bruno Fernando, guys who are all starting with less than 10 points per game. Obviously, it's going to hurt you in points, but most likely, if you're not scoring, you're probably not getting rebounds. You're probably not getting assists as well, and that's where they're really struggling. But you look at who they've got on their IR with Mitchell Robinson, Justice Winslow. They did have John Collins. He's suspended for a while, who's supposed to be really good for the Atlanta Hawks. And so they're just trying to figure it out. They've got some good performances out of Fred VanVleet and DeJounte Murray, guys like that. They've had some struggles, but they're trying to find their way. And surprisingly, Luke Kennard has been really good for them this year with 19 points, 4 assists per game, almost 4 rebounds per game. Decent stat line, but just not enough performance in this last week against a pretty decent Atlanta Hawks team. So the Bucks get drowned out by the Hawks, get absolutely taken over by 7-2. So let's move on to our second matchup, which was the New Orleans Pelicans at the Toronto Raptors. Not too surprising, as the Raptors hit league high in points with 1,020. They hit 110 three-pointers on the week with 362 rebounds as well. But the New Orleans Pelicans played close in blocks and steals, as they were only down by 1 and down by 3 respectively in blocks and steals each. But Toronto's James Harden and Damian Lillard combined for 273 points and 40 of their 110 three-pointers made on the week. The Raptors were obviously the favorite to win the championship going into this year, and they dominated a New Orleans Pelicans team that is good but not in the same tier as the Toronto Raptors. it is not surprising that they won this matchup. I do give a lot of credit to Kevin for once again staying close in a lot of categories, and he was playing close most of the week up until those last couple of days. Now, even though Mac is not as proficient in basketball, he's doing a very good job of staying competitive in basketball somehow, as he beat the Chicago Bulls in Chicago 6 categories to 3. The Timberwolves won blocks by 1. They had 10 more assists and almost 50 more points than the Chicago Bulls. Bulls somehow won steals with 23 steals to 17, but they had a league-low 29 starts on the week. I mean, obviously, especially with them having that low of starts, they're going to win the turnover battle. And, I mean, the Timberwolves can't hit free throws worth shit, as they are shooting 67% for last week. So the Bulls took that one as well, but they dominated in pretty much everything else. The Timberwolves have a decent team. I don't think they are going to compete for a playoff spot at this point. They'll have a lot of ground to make up, as they're facing an uphill battle, as they currently sit at 4th place in the Michael Jordan division behind the Lakers, Hawks, and Mavericks at the top, with the Mavericks and the Hawks with a tied record. So it'll be interesting to see where they sit, especially with they're only about 2.5 games back at this point. There's a lot of season left to play, but they have a lot of ground to make up in terms of categories and just trying to match what other teams have done. So why don't we move on to my matchup with the Denver Nuggets. I gotta say, this for me was a big testing week on where my team truly sat in this league, because obviously it's a 2-team league, as most people view it, with Toronto being number 1, Denver being number 2. Those were the 2 teams playing in the championship last year. They're expected to be the favorites for the championship this year. But I feel like my team played pretty well. I only lost rebounds by about 60, assists by 30. I was able to take steals, blocks, and turnovers. Obviously, turnovers is a hit or miss category. You're expected to have more turnovers if you're scoring more points, which the Denver Nuggets absolutely did. But I've got to say, I feel pretty good about my team with, even though it was a losing week, 3 categories, 3 wins, 5 losses, and 1 tie, with each of us tying with 58 3-pointers on the week. I'm pretty happy with that performance, taking on a guy like Keith that, I mean, we all know how he is. He's a competitive son of a gun, and goddamn, he's always going to put up a good line in any sport. He's never going to sit back and do a rebuild. It would be weird to see him or Jared truly do a rebuild in any sport where they don't make the playoffs. But this was a good litmus test for my team. Denver Nuggets played their asses off with 349 rebounds, like I said, dominated assists for the most part. Let's take a quick look at that actual matchup. Detail-wise, the biggest one for them was obviously best player in the league with Giannis Antetokounmpo, 60 rebounds, 22 assists with 137 points, absolutely dominant. The only player on their team to cross 100 points on the week. But hitting 60 rebounds, I mean, over the... Let's see if I could see games played, but I mean, that's probably 3 games in a week. So it's an average of... God, let me see, actually. I could tell you real quick. Played 4 games last week. So even 25, 15, and 6 on the night, essentially every night, that's great. So it's expected. Luka Doncic and his top 3 performers. And Pascal Siakam has been a very good pickup for him. Has been really good this year with the rebounds and points. And a decent 3-point performer as well with 6 on the week last week. So Denver tries to keep pace with the Toronto Raptors and New York Knicks at this point. They sit 3rd in the Larry Bird division, but that's a very tough division, especially taking on Vic's Knicks and Jared's Raptors. So mentioning the Knicks, they played a very close game against Los Angeles at home. The Knicks surprisingly they won this one, but in a much closer matchup than what I would have expected after what we saw from them earlier this year. They took points pretty well and then blocks very well, but the Lakers were able to sneak past with 3-pointers and steals. They were able to take those categories, and the one thing that killed the Lakers was no Laker reached 75 points on the week. That really hurt them in the end, because had one of them or even a couple of them reached 75 points, they probably could have taken that away and gone with the upset of the week with the Lakers beating the Knicks. But Vic continues to have a very good basketball team. Whether he sets his lineup, I have not been able to tell you 100%, but you look at all the assets that he's poured into it over these last few years with Kyrie Irving, Ja Morant, obviously Kemba Walker. He's got LeBron James. He's a guy that if he sets his lineup, he should be expected to win every single week and be right up there with the Toronto Raptors. And the Knicks are a surprisingly scary team if Vic stays up with it. So just before we sign off for the night, let's scroll through the matchups for basketball. You've got the Raptors playing the Mavericks in Dallas, the Knicks playing the Timberwolves, Lakers taking on the Hawks, Bulls taking on the Pelicans, and then the Bucks taking on the Nuggets at this point. Definitely some pretty good matchups here in week 4 already. Some of them are not close. A lot of them mostly aren't, but the closest one is the Pelicans and Bulls, which I'm surprised Kevin has not pulled away from the Bulls as fast as he probably should have. But we'll have to wait and see what happens later in the week, and we will review that later this week, which sounds like it'll be Mac and me for episode 7. But that's it for tonight. A hell of a week for this last one, and I'm really excited to see what happens in football. We've got some really good playoff chases coming down to it. Obviously, the Patriots are eliminated as they are 0-10 on the season, and the Green Bay Packers are officially eliminated as well. There's no way they can make the playoffs. The Miami Dolphins, for as much as they've been given shit this year, they have a chance to win and sneak into the playoffs. They would need a lot of help at this point as they take on the Atlanta Falcons this week, and they would need a lot of other scoreboard things to happen. I don't see it happening, so it's almost down to, really it's going to come down to whether the Saints or the Falcons want that playoff position more. They may have to play the waiver wire and just do what it takes to win week in and week out to make the playoffs at this point. I think I'm going to call for the Falcons to probably take it, but we'll have to wait and see, and we can review that more later this week. That's it for episode 6 at this point, and I will talk to you guys later this week, hopefully with Mac on the other side.